Hey guys, today we're stepping into the past, way back into a time when life was raw and survival was a daily battle. Picture it, the vast landscape of the Stone Age, the air crisp and sharp, the earth underfoot damp and unpredictable. There's no soft bed to crawl into, no neatly stocked pantry to rummage through. Instead, it's all about hunting, gathering, and, most importantly, surviving the harsh elements with your wits and your tribe. And while we often imagine the men as the hunters, wielding spears and taking down large game, women in the Stone Age were just as crucial to the survival of the group. You probably won't survive this if you think women were just sitting around waiting for dinner, because, let me tell you, they were absolutely essential to the survival game, and their contributions were huge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not share your location and local time in the comments? I love hearing from where you're tuning in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. While the men were out hunting the big game, it was often the women who held down the fort literally. They didn't just wait for the hunt to come back. They were actively involved in gathering food, managing the home, and looking after the tribe's future. Women in the Stone Age were responsible for collecting edible plants, seeds, fruits, and nuts, which were staples of the diet. Without their knowledge of the land and its offerings, survival would have been far harder. The role of women in the Stone Age wasn't just about nurturing children, though that was important. It was about actively ensuring that their tribe stayed fed, safe, and protected from the dangers of the environment. Women played a pivotal role in maintaining the health of the community. They were the early experts in foraging, a skill that kept people alive long before farming or domesticated animals entered the picture. Every day, women would venture out into the wild to gather what the land could provide, and their foraging skills were the backbone of the diet. But it wasn't just about food. Women were also essential in the fabric of early human society, from their responsibilities within the family to their role in maintaining the social structure. Their contributions were the foundation of the survival strategy, and their abilities were deeply respected, even if often overlooked in modern retellings of history. This section explores what life was really like for women in the Stone Age, showcasing their central roles in maintaining both family life and the greater survival of their communities. While men are often depicted as the primary hunters in the Stone Age, the crucial role women played as gatherers was absolutely indispensable. Imagine yourself standing in a forest, scanning the ground for edible plants, berries, and tubers. Your survival and the survival of your community depends on what you find. You can feel the weight of the task as you gather the nuts and fruits that will provide essential nutrients, the food that keeps the tribe alive while the men are out hunting. Women in the Stone Age weren't just responsible for gathering. They were the backbone of the tribe's food supply. They had an intimate knowledge of the land, its seasons, and the plants and animals that thrived in it. Without them, the tribe would have struggled to survive. Foraging wasn't just a side task. It was a major part of the daily survival strategy. Historians still argue about the extent to which women relied solely on foraging or whether they worked alongside men in hunting. Some scholars believe that women did take part in hunting, especially smaller game, while others suggest that the primary role of women was to gather food and ensure the tribe's survival through that means. What's clear, however, is that the women's role in gathering was indispensable. As foraging experts, they knew where the best plant-based food sources were located, and their ability to gather efficiently made a significant impact on the tribe's ability to survive. The men, while capable hunters, couldn't always bring back meat every day, but women's ability to forage meant that the tribe could eat regularly, even when hunting wasn't successful. One particularly interesting aspect of women's foraging skills was their knowledge of which plants were edible, which were poisonous, and which had medicinal properties. This wasn't just about survival in terms of nutrition, it was also about healing. Women were likely the first healers in human history, using plants to create remedies for illness, wounds, and other ailments. This connection to the earth, This deep understanding of the natural world allowed women to play a key role in not only feeding their communities, but also protecting them from disease and injury. It's possible that women's role as gatherers of both food and medicinal plants also gave them a spiritual or leadership role within their groups, as their knowledge of the land could have been seen as a form of power. As the environment changed, so too did the availability of food sources. The shift from an ice age world to a more temperate climate would have had a profound impact on what was available for gathering. New plants, trees, and seasonal foods would have become part of women's foraging repertoire, while some of the foods they had relied on during the colder months might have become scarce. This environmental change would have required constant adaptation. Early women were not just passive participants in survival, they were active problem solvers, figuring out new ways to find food, store it, and prepare it for the tribe. Their ingenuity in the face of changing climates and resources helped ensure the survival of early human communities. In a way, the role of women in foraging was more than just a practical necessity. It was a deeply ingrained skill that became the foundation of human survival. It wasn't just about gathering food. It was about knowing the land, understanding its rhythms, and having the resourcefulness to make the most of what nature provided. For early humans, especially as they began to settle into more permanent communities, the ability to gather and store food became critical. Women didn't just ensure their families had enough to eat, they ensured the group thrived. Yet, this wasn't a world of luxury. The food women gathered was often simple: tubers, berries, roots, and wild vegetables, often bitter and requiring labor-intensive preparation. The landscape, though rich with potential, wasn't always kind. A bad season could mean scarcity, and a failure to gather the right plants could lead to illness or malnutrition. It wasn't like running to the market for groceries. Food gathering was a daily battle, fought with nothing but the knowledge of the land and the tools at hand. Early women didn't just gather. They fought to keep their tribe alive through their deep understanding of the land and their unwavering determination to succeed. Historians still debate whether early humans, especially women, could have foraged enough to meet their nutritional needs without the constant addition of meat. Some suggest that early humans were mostly carnivores and that the plant-based diet was merely supplementary. Others argue that women were more self-sufficient, relying on plants for the majority of their diet, especially in the warmer months when hunting wasn't always possible. Regardless, what is certain is that women's foraging skills were an essential part of the survival strategy for early human groups, and their role in gathering wasn't just a task. It was an art of survival that helped the community thrive. In addition to their crucial role in foraging, women in the Stone Age were central to the management of family life, raising children, and maintaining the social structure of their communities. Imagine the scene. It's a busy morning in the camp, with the men preparing for a hunt while women prepare food and ensure that everything in the shelter is in order. The rhythm of the day is set by the needs of the group, and the women are key in making sure the community stays functional, healthy, and safe. They didn't just gather food, they nurtured the group, kept things running, and ensured that the next generation would be prepared to continue this cycle of survival. Historians argue that women's role in child-rearing was both central and complex. On one hand, women were the primary caregivers, responsible for raising the next generation, teaching children essential survival skills, and ensuring that they were physically and emotionally prepared for the challenges of life. The bonds formed between mother and child were essential for both individual development and the group's long-term survival. Without women's nurturing, the tribe's future would have been uncertain. Yet, this wasn't a simple, passive task. Raising children in the Stone Age meant preparing them for a tough world where survival wasn't guaranteed. Women likely taught their children vital skills, such as foraging, identifying plants, and using tools. They passed down knowledge of the land and the seasons, understanding that survival depended not just on being fed, but on knowing how to hunt, gather, and protect the community. The knowledge that women imparted to their children wasn't just about physical survival. It was about creating the next generation of resourceful, capable humans who could keep this cycle of survival going. Some historians even suggest that women were also involved in the early social organization of human groups. While the men hunted and provided food, the women created the social structure that held everything together. They may have been the glue that kept the group functioning smoothly. Social cohesion was essential for survival in small, close-knit groups, and women played a central role in this. They were responsible for maintaining the daily rhythm of life, ensuring that food was prepared, shelters were maintained, and everyone was taken care of. The ability to create a sense of unity within the group was crucial in the Stone Age, as the group had to work together to meet the constant challenges of survival. Women's role in this process wasn't just about nurturing children, it was about building relationships, forging bonds of trust and cooperation, and keeping the tribe unified during times of scarcity or danger. Early human life was about cooperation, not competition, and women were often the ones leading the charge in creating the sense of community that kept the group alive. In addition to their domestic roles, women in the Stone Age were also integral to the early development of culture and spirituality. Many early cultures had distinct rituals and practices related to birth, death, and the cycles of life, and women were often at the center of these practices. The role of women in these spiritual and social functions cannot be overstated. Early humans were not just focused on survival, they were also deeply spiritual, and these spiritual beliefs often revolved around fertility, the earth, and the cycles of nature. Women, as the bearers of life, were central to these beliefs, and their role in spiritual practices would have been vital to the group's sense of continuity and survival. Historians still argue about the exact role of women in early human spirituality. Some suggest that women were the primary spiritual leaders, while others argue that men played a more prominent role. What is clear, however, is that women were deeply connected to the spiritual and cultural life of early human groups. They likely played significant roles in rituals, ceremonies, and social gatherings, and their influence was essential in the development of early human culture. The social, cultural, and spiritual roles that women played were not just tasks, they were central to the survival and evolution of early human communities. Women were the thread that connected the past, present, and future, passing down knowledge, nurturing the young, and ensuring that the group remained intact. Early human societies, despite the harsh conditions they faced, were held together by the resilience, adaptability, and resourcefulness of women. It's clear that women weren't just caretakers, they were the foundation of early human survival and the cultural fabric that would eventually lead to the rise of more complex societies. As we dive deeper into the life of women in the Stone Age, it becomes clear that their role was far from simple. They were not just caretakers or gatherers, they were critical to the very structure of early human societies. While men were out hunting, women were responsible for maintaining the stability of the group in ways that were no less important. Their strength wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and social. Early human societies were built on cooperation, and women, as the nurturers and stabilizers, helped ensure that the group functioned smoothly and effectively. Foraging, as we know, was a key part of women's roles in the Stone Age, but their responsibilities didn't end there. In addition to feeding the group, women likely played a significant role in the actual management of resources. Whether it was ensuring that food was stored correctly or distributing it fairly, women were likely the ones who maintained the balance. The ability to manage the flow of food and other resources was essential for survival. Women weren't just out gathering. They were the ones ensuring that the tribe could survive through lean seasons and unpredictable climates. Imagine this. You are a woman in a small group, managing the logistics of a tribe. You would need to remember where to find the best sources of food, how to preserve what you gathered, and when to trade with neighboring groups. You'd be responsible for both the day-to-day survival and the long-term success of your community. This wasn't just about gathering berries or roots. It was about understanding the patterns of the land and using that knowledge to ensure the group stayed alive. It's easy to overlook the importance of resource management in early human societies, but without it, the group would have faced constant risk of famine or failure. This deep knowledge of the land and the seasons, passed down from woman to woman, was what made the difference between life and death. Women, by virtue of their roles in gathering and managing food, were not only ensuring that there was enough to eat, they were shaping the very survival strategies of the tribe. Historians still debate whether women in early human societies had more direct control over the tribe's resources than men, or whether control was more shared. Some suggest that the role of women as gatherers naturally put them in charge of resource distribution, while others argue that men took on leadership roles and held authority over resources like food. What is clear is that women were integral to survival, with their intimate knowledge of the land, the animals, and the cycles of nature making them indispensable to the group. This wasn't just a job, it was a vital force that kept the community running smoothly, and in the early days, survival depended on this type of cooperation. Another aspect of the Stone Age women's role that often goes unrecognized is their physical strength. We often think of early humans as being tough, rugged individuals, but it wasn't just the men who had to have that toughness. Women, too, had to be physically resilient to meet the challenges of their environment. Their tasks weren't just about staying close to camp or tending children. Women were likely involved in the physically demanding process of foraging, carrying heavy loads of food, wood, and water, and even helping with the butchering and processing of animals. This physical labor, combined with the emotional and social work of keeping the group intact, meant that women were incredibly strong in multiple ways. Their bodies were conditioned by the demands of the environment, and their endurance was just as critical to the group's survival as any hunt or battle. Physical strength, in this context, wasn't just about muscle. It was about the ability to withstand long hours, harsh conditions, and relentless physical demands. While much of the historical narrative has been shaped by the idea that men were the primary providers through hunting, women's contributions were not limited to foraging and child-rearing. Women had to be resourceful, adaptable, and tough. They were the ones who worked behind the scenes to keep the group running. The management of resources, physical labor, and social cohesion were all tasks that rested on their shoulders, and without their skills and effort, survival would have been a far more difficult and uncertain prospect. Early human societies, in their most basic form, thrived on cooperation and collaboration. Women were central to this system, not just as nurturers, but as active participants in the group's survival strategy. Their roles weren't limited to gathering and cooking. They were the backbone of the tribe, ensuring that the group stayed together, stayed fed, and, most importantly, stayed alive. Without their contributions, the foundation of early human society would have been far weaker. As early human communities began to form and grow, the role of women in maintaining not only the daily survival, but the social stability of the group became ever more significant. The work that women did in the Stone Age wasn't just limited to gathering and childcare. It was at the heart of the tribe's ability to function as a cohesive unit. With each task, whether it was foraging for food, preparing meals, or managing the camp, women ensured that the group could thrive in a constantly changing environment. While men might have ventured into the wild to hunt large game, the daily work of gathering the essential sustenance, processing it, and preserving it for the future often fell to the women. Imagine yourself in this world. The men are gone for hours or even days on hunts, and your task as a woman is to gather what the land can provide. You'll spend hours combing the forest or fields for roots, nuts, berries, and seeds. These foods weren't just snacks, they were crucial to your survival, providing essential vitamins and calories that the group needed to get by. Without this daily foraging, survival would have been far more difficult. But the work didn't stop at simply gathering food. You also had to process it, whether that meant drying, smoking, or storing it in a way that would ensure the tribe had enough to eat through leaner times. Women likely had to deal with the preservation of meat from hunts as well, making sure the food didn't spoil. Every task, from gathering to storing to cooking, had to be done efficiently and in sync with the seasons. Understanding when to harvest certain plants, how to store food to avoid spoilage, and when to forage for fresh food was vital knowledge that kept the group alive. This wasn't a leisurely walk through the forest. It was a finely tuned, survival-focused effort that required skill, strength, and an intricate understanding of the natural world. But women weren't just foragers and caregivers. They were also the ones who ensured that the group maintained social cohesion. Social dynamics were crucial for survival in a world where dangers were ever present, and cooperation was key. Women played central roles in keeping the peace within the tribe, managing relationships, and reinforcing the social bonds that were necessary for a group to stay together. The emotional labor of managing relationships, whether between parents and children, siblings, or between members of the larger group, was, and still is, often overlooked. However, it's clear that this role was vital in the Stone Age, especially as the complexity of early human societies began to grow. In early human tribes, conflicts, though perhaps small and mostly about resources, could have been catastrophic for the survival of the group. Leaders may not have always been chosen based on strength alone. The ability to navigate social tension, manage disputes, and foster cooperation likely became increasingly important as groups grew larger and more complex. Women, with their essential social roles, would have been at the heart of this process. The bonds formed within the group were what kept it from falling apart when tensions rose. Social skills, negotiation, and emotional intelligence weren't just important, they were integral to survival. Historians debate whether early humans, particularly women, held more authority in these matters than we give them credit for. Some argue that men held the more visible roles of power, especially in the context of hunting and defense, but others suggest that women, with their control over food, resources, and social cohesion, were the true leaders within early communities. What is clear is that survival in these early groups wasn't just about who had the sharpest spear or the strongest arms. It was about who could keep the group together, maintain stability, and nurture relationships. As early human societies became more complex, these roles only became more pronounced. Women didn't just care for the children, they also kept the community functioning on a daily basis, ensuring that the group's social bonds remained intact, that food was plentiful, and that everyone worked together for the survival of all. Their work was foundational to the social fabric of early human life, creating the foundation on which more sophisticated social structures would later be built. And even beyond the functional aspects of their roles, women were often central to the spiritual life of the group. Their connection to fertility, birth, and the continuity of life would have been seen as a sacred duty. The fact that women gave life, literally and figuratively, was an essential part of early human spirituality and likely made their roles in the community not only functional but also sacred. Women, as caregivers and nurturers, carried an immense responsibility, not just to their children, but to the continuation of the tribe. The historical picture of early human societies often centers on the physical strength and prowess of men in the hunt or in defense, but the true strength of these early communities rested in the balance that women brought to the group. They weren't just passive participants, they were the glue that held everything together. They were not just gatherers of food, they were gatherers of people, relationships, and traditions, and without them, early human communities would have struggled to survive, let alone thrive. As we continue to explore the lives of women in the Stone Age, we see that their role wasn't limited to just maintaining the home and providing for the children. Women were also key players in shaping the cultural and spiritual fabric of their communities. Early humans lived in a world where survival wasn't just about food and shelter. It was about understanding the rhythms of nature and the unseen forces that governed their world. In this context, women's roles extended far beyond domestic chores. They were deeply involved in rituals, ceremonies, and spiritual practices that helped maintain the balance of the tribe. Imagine you are an elder woman in the tribe, gathering around the fire with younger women, sharing wisdom, passing down knowledge about plants, animals, and the changing seasons. You're not just teaching them how to gather or how to nurture children, you're teaching them how to connect with the spiritual world. In many ancient cultures, women held special spiritual roles, often associated with fertility, life cycles, and the earth itself. Early human societies, particularly in the Stone Age, likely saw women as the stewards of life, both literally and figuratively. They were the bearers of children, the keepers of the earth's cycles, and in many cases, the leaders of spiritual practices. Historians argue whether women were the primary spiritual leaders in early human societies or if leadership roles were shared between men and women. Some suggest that women, as the life-givers, held the highest spiritual authority, while others argue that men might have been more involved in the ceremonial leadership. What is clear, though, is that women played a central role in spiritual and ritual life. Whether it was performing fertility rites, leading healing rituals, or interpreting the signs from nature, women likely held an indispensable role in the cultural and spiritual continuity of their communities. Women were also likely the primary creators of early art, painting, carving, and creating symbolic objects. The walls of caves, like those in Lascaux and Altamira, are filled with depictions of animals, human figures, and geometric patterns. While the identities of the artists remain unknown, it's plausible that women contributed significantly to the creation of these early artworks. The practice of making art wasn't just for decoration, it was deeply tied to rituals and the spiritual practices of the time. Art was a way for early humans to connect with the natural world, with the gods, and with each other. Women, as central figures in the spiritual life of the tribe, would have been key participants in this form of cultural expression. Moreover, women's roles in early spiritual life weren't just limited to the tribe's rituals and ceremonies. Women's understanding of plants, animals, and natural remedies meant they also played a pivotal role in early medicine. Their knowledge of herbs, roots, and the medicinal properties of plants was passed down through generations, making them essential to the survival and health of the community. In many early human societies, women were the healers, the first doctors, nurses, and midwives, using their intimate knowledge of the natural world to treat illnesses and injuries. Their ability to care for the sick, as well as to assist with childbirth, was not only practical but symbolic, representing the role of women as the nurturers of life. Historians still debate how women's roles as healers and spiritual leaders may have evolved over time. Some suggest that women's power in these roles diminished as societies grew more complex, and as men took on more prominent leadership positions. Others argue that women's spiritual and medicinal knowledge was highly valued and perhaps even central to the tribe's survival. Regardless of the specifics, it's clear that women held positions of deep respect and influence within their communities, not just for their ability to care for the tribe, but for their connection to the forces of nature, life, and death. The deep spiritual significance of women's roles also had a practical impact on the social cohesion of the tribe. Women were the backbone of the community, not just because of their contributions to survival, but because of the way they connected the physical world with the spiritual. They understood that the earth was more than just a place to gather food. It was a living entity that required respect and balance. The rituals that women led likely ensured the survival of the group by fostering unity and cooperation, and by connecting the tribe to the greater natural world. The social role of women in the Stone Age was one of immense importance. Women weren't just caretakers and gatherers, they were the spiritual, social, and cultural leaders of their tribes. They carried knowledge passed down through generations, shaped the spiritual life of the tribe, and helped maintain the balance of the group. In a time when survival was precarious, women's knowledge, strength, and leadership were essential to the tribe's survival and prosperity. Their influence shaped the early human experience, helping to guide humanity through the most fundamental and transformative stages of life. As early human societies developed and began to settle in more permanent communities, the roles of women continued to evolve. The need for women to maintain the social fabric of the group grew more complex as communities became larger and more organized. No longer were women simply caretakers or gatherers, they were integral to the overall survival strategy of the tribe, balancing the physical demands of their environment with the social and cultural responsibilities of the group. In many ways, the Stone Age was a time when women's influence extended far beyond the home and into the broader life of the community. Imagine the daily routines. While the men may have ventured out to hunt large game, women were responsible for much of the work that kept the community alive. This included gathering edible plants, fruits, and nuts, preparing food, and keeping the group's living space organized. Women were also responsible for the processing of meat from the hunt, cutting it, preserving it, and making sure it lasted through the harsh seasons. Yet, despite this labor-intensive work, their role in the social structure was not just physical. It was deeply tied to their ability to maintain the tribe's culture, relationships, and collective identity. Historians continue to debate how much of early human society was matriarchal or patriarchal, but what is clear is that women played a significant role in the development of early social and political structures. They weren't just gathering food, they were organizing resources, overseeing the well-being of the children, and maintaining the group's social equilibrium. They managed the day-to-day life of the tribe, ensuring that everyone's needs were met and that the group could survive the unpredictable nature of the environment. Interestingly, as early humans began to form larger, more permanent settlements, there may have been a shift in gender roles, with men taking on more public leadership roles as hunting and protection became more complex. However, women's influence likely remained central to the social cohesion of the community. Their ability to manage resources, guide the spiritual practices, and lead by example kept the tribe grounded and unified. While men might have played the dominant role in warfare and hunting, women's role as the bearers of life and the nurturers of the community ensured that the next generation could continue to thrive. The division of labor between men and women wasn't necessarily one of inequality. Rather, it was a balance of complementary roles. Men provided the meat through hunting, but women ensured the long-term survival of the group through gathering, preparing, and preserving food. Women also took care of the sick and elderly, used plants for medicinal purposes, and played a significant role in the spiritual practices that united the community. This cooperation between men and women ensured that survival wasn't just about physical strength. It was about social cohesion, resource management, and the continuity of the tribe. The importance of women's roles within the tribe cannot be overstated. Their work ensured that the group stayed fed, healthy, and united, even in the face of environmental challenges, predators, and scarce resources. The bonds they helped build through cooperation, love, and care were the foundation upon which early human societies were built. Without women, these communities would have lacked the cohesion needed to adapt and survive in the long term. They were not just the caretakers of the family, they were the caretakers of the entire tribe's future. But it wasn't just about the practical aspects of survival. As we've seen, women also played a significant role in the spiritual and cultural development of early human societies. They were often the spiritual leaders of their communities, connected to the forces of nature and life itself. Their understanding of fertility, birth, and the cycles of the earth made them key figures in the tribe's spiritual life. They performed rituals, ensured fertility in the community, and likely had a hand in shaping the earliest religious beliefs. This spiritual connection to the earth and its cycles not only helped the tribe survive, it gave them meaning and purpose in an unpredictable world. Early human societies were not just about physical survival. They were about understanding the world and the forces that governed it. And women, through their roles as caregivers, gatherers, and spiritual leaders, were integral to this process. The survival of the tribe depended not just on the availability of resources, but on the social cohesion and spiritual connection that women nurtured within the group. Without their efforts, early human societies would have lacked the stability and unity needed to face the challenges of the natural world. As human societies progressed from their nomadic roots to more settled communities, the roles of women continued to evolve in ways that would eventually form the foundation of complex civilizations. However, one thing remained constant: their central role in the survival of the group. Women's contributions were foundational, not just for physical survival, but for the social and spiritual health of their communities. They were the unsung leaders, shaping the fabric of early human society, from the way resources were managed to the very survival of the next generation. In the face of environmental changes, whether it was shifting climates, migration patterns, or the eventual disappearance of certain animals, women's ability to adapt was unparalleled. While men were off hunting, battling, and exploring, women ensured that the tribe had food, shelter, and a safe place to call home. The rhythm of daily life, the organization of the tribe's activities, and the future of the group all relied on the woman's knowledge of the land, plants, and animals. Their ability to know when to forage for food, when to gather plants for medicinal purposes, and when to care for the sick and elderly kept the tribe running smoothly. Historians often discuss early human societies in terms of the division of labor: men hunting, women gathering and tending to children. But this binary view doesn't do justice to the complexity of their roles. Women, by necessity, became the backbone of the tribe, multitasking in ways that we can only begin to appreciate today. It wasn't just about gathering food. It was about knowing how to prepare it, store it, and keep the tribe alive during the lean months when food was scarce. Women were also the ones who understood the cycles of the seasons, the ebb and flow of nature, and how to use this knowledge to benefit their group. But beyond the practicalities, early women were deeply involved in the spiritual and cultural life of their communities. Their roles in rituals and ceremonies were central, often connecting them to the spiritual forces that governed the world. Many early human cultures revered women as symbols of fertility and life, associating them with the earth itself. These spiritual connections gave women a unique position in their communities, allowing them to shape not only the day-to-day survival of their tribes, but also the worldview of their people. Women, as the nurturers and caretakers, held a significant position in maintaining the tribe's spiritual health, which was just as important as its physical well-being. This spiritual role also gave women authority, though not necessarily in the form of political power as we know it today. Early human societies, based on communal living, relied on a shared understanding of the spiritual world to keep the group united. Women, as the primary caregivers and spiritual guides, played a key role in maintaining this unity. The family structure, often centered around the maternal figure, was the foundation of the tribe's social life. Women helped to define the tribe's identity, ensuring that cultural practices, stories, and rituals were passed down through generations. However, the rise of agriculture and more permanent settlements would eventually alter the role of women in human societies. As societies became more hierarchical, gender roles became more rigid. The shift from a purely survival-based society to one that was more focused on production and trade led to a redefinition of women's roles. Men, who had always taken part in hunting and fighting, began to assume leadership positions within the newly emerging agricultural economy. Yet, this doesn't mean that women lost their importance. Rather, their roles evolved. The rise of agriculture brought with it new duties for women, caring for crops, managing food storage, and, of course, continuing to care for their families. These new responsibilities would continue to shape the role of women in societies throughout history. Even in these early stages, women were shaping the future in ways that were integral to human development. As agriculture began to spread and societies became more complex, women's work in the home, raising children, tending to crops, ensuring the tribe's physical and spiritual health became the glue that held society together. The ability of women to adapt to changing conditions, take on new responsibilities, and maintain the health of the community was as essential as any technological advancement. What we see is that throughout human history, women have not only been caretakers of the next generation, but also caretakers of the group's survival, be it physically, emotionally, or spiritually. Their influence wasn't just within the home. it extended to the very structure of the tribe, the rituals that kept the tribe united, and the social systems that ensured survival. In many ways, the strength of early human societies and the resilience of the people who lived in them depended on the women who held everything together. From the very beginning, women were pivotal in shaping not just survival, but the cultural and social structures that allowed humanity to thrive. As the complexities of human life grew, so did the roles of women, who remained the bedrock of family, community, and culture. Their ability to adapt, to work together, and to nurture both the body and spirit of the tribe was essential to human progress. The Stone Age was not just a time of survival, it was a time of transformation, and women were at the heart of that transformation. As we've explored, the roles of women in the Stone Age were multifaceted and integral to the survival of the group. Their contributions weren't just practical, they were deeply embedded in the spiritual, social, and cultural fabric of early human communities. Women helped establish the foundations of human society, from the basic daily survival tasks to the more complex responsibilities that ensured the tribe's cohesion and prosperity. But beyond these immediate contributions, the role of women in the Stone Age had lasting effects, shaping the development of human culture, identity, and survival strategies for generations to come. One of the lasting impacts of women's roles in early human societies was their influence on social cohesion. In small, nomadic bands, the daily routines were flexible and based on immediate survival needs, but as communities grew and became more sedentary, the need for organized social structures became more apparent. Women, with their responsibility for managing food, child rearing, and the daily upkeep of the community, were the glue that held the social fabric together. They maintained the essential relationships within the group, fostering cooperation and understanding through shared tasks, communal rituals, and the care of the young and elderly. As early human groups grew larger and more complex, the role of women in social cohesion became even more vital. The rise of agriculture and permanent settlements shifted the dynamics of the group. No longer just about survival, human societies began to deal with issues of resource management, leadership, and governance. But these new concerns didn't negate the importance of the roles women had played in keeping communities intact. If anything, as these societies became more complex, the importance of women's roles as caretakers, gatherers, and spiritual guides only increased. This increasing complexity meant that women's roles were no longer just about the physical labor of gathering or child rearing. They were also becoming key figures in the spiritual and social development of early human communities. As agriculture provided a more stable food supply, women's roles expanded into managing the resources that were essential to a thriving society. They were involved in the early stages of crop cultivation, managing food stores, and developing techniques for food preservation, which were essential for ensuring the survival of the group during harsher seasons. Historians still debate the exact nature of gender roles in these early societies. While some argue that early human societies were more egalitarian, others suggest that with the rise of agriculture, men increasingly assumed leadership roles, particularly in the realm of agriculture, hunting, and trade. What is clear, however, is that women's roles were never purely limited to the domestic sphere. Women were active participants in the development of the group's culture, economy, and spiritual life. They weren't just caregivers. They were the primary agents of cultural continuity, passing down knowledge, customs, and rituals that helped form the foundation of society. The importance of women's roles wasn't just limited to the practical aspects of food and family. Women also had a significant impact on the group's spiritual life. Early human spirituality was deeply connected to the cycles of nature, birth, death, and the changing seasons, and women, as the ones who gave birth and nurtured life, were naturally seen as the central figures in spiritual rituals and ceremonies. Their role in fertility rituals, ceremonies to ensure good harvests, and rites of passage for the young was vital to the social and spiritual health of the community. As early humans began to recognize the importance of cooperation and social structure, the role of women as the keepers of both the physical and spiritual health of the tribe became indispensable. Women's nurturing skills extended beyond the home. They were deeply embedded in the cultural and spiritual life of the tribe, shaping how early humans understood their world and their place within it. Through their contributions, women helped establish the foundations of early human societies, ensuring that the group could survive, adapt, and thrive in an ever-changing world. Even as early human societies began to evolve and become more complex, women's influence continued to be crucial. The legacy of women in the Stone Age wasn't just about survival. It was about the creation of a cultural identity, the establishment of social structures, and the preservation of the group's collective knowledge. The survival of early human communities was due in no small part to the resilience, strength, and resourcefulness of women, whose roles helped shape the course of human history. The Stone Age was a time of intense struggle, but it was also a time of transformation and growth. Women played a pivotal role in that transformation, ensuring the survival of their communities and the continuation of cultural practices that would shape humanity for generations to come. Their contributions were far more than just the basic acts of gathering food or raising children. They were the very foundation of human social life, culture, and identity.